Well, good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. And for anyone else that's watching, I'm Tom Leahy. I'm the Acting City Manager. We have two presentations today. First up, I would like to introduce Aaron Sutton, our Director of the Office of Emergency Management. And Aaron is going to provide a brief update on the COVID-19 situation. Aaron?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I wanted to update you on our numbers for today. As of this afternoon, we have 6,171 confirmed cases in the Commonwealth of Virginia with 154 deaths. In Virginia Beach, our case count today is 252 cases with 6 deaths, and 148 individuals in total have been released from isolation in our city. The Commonwealth of Virginia released a model yesterday and emphasized that social distancing for the Commonwealth of Virginia is working. That is great news and allows us to really look at continuing our effort in following social distancing. The governor is expected to issue an update on Executive Order 53 tomorrow during his press briefing. Also, the Occupational Health and Safety team has been very busy working through several city policies in the use of PPE, recommendations on cloth facial coverings, workplace employee monitoring, all to be aligned with the CDC guidance. The policies are in review, and they are building public service announcements to go with all of the information as we push it out. As you all are very well aware, the PPE supply chain has been significantly disrupted and continues to be an issue. We had an update from Virginia Department of Emergency Management today, and while they have put in an order for over $27 million worth of supplies, we have received very little of it. So we continue to stay in constant touch with them and continue to centralize our ordering from here when we do have leads on vendors that will supply us with our to fill our gaps. One of the things that is extremely difficult to get is face shields, and our public libraries have stepped up and are 3D printing face shields for our first responders and actually made their first delivery yesterday to Virginia Beach EMS. The EOC has, as I expressed last week, moved to a formal incident command structure. This has allowed for better information management and coordination of emergency operations. It was never more prudent than yesterday when we had a significant storm blow through. And as you're aware, we had significant power outages. We had, at the height, 45,000 in the city of Virginia Beach without power. That is more than Hurricane Michael, and caused some disruptions to our city facilities across our area. I'm pleased to announce today, though, we are down to 2,280 without power. So Dominion Energy has done an outstanding job in getting us back online. One of the other things that it allows us to do in this command structure is to start working on longer term planning. For those of you that are not aware, hurricane season is 47 days away. One of the other areas that we have to be considerate of is once we do get a vaccine, how do we distribute, or how do we support our health department in distributing it quickly and efficiently? The other thing is thinking about second or third waves if they're possible. So the long-term planning aspect is extremely important, and with the ICS structure allows a small group to sit and work through that. The city continues to provide child care options for essential employees at recreation facilities. Right now we're at just under 60 children for city employees and 12 from Centera. Public safety call volume is still low, and that definitely reinforces that the stay-at-home order is working. One thing of note is that as of April 8th, Department of Human Services has received 2,734 SNAP applications and has processed over 2,000 of them. This is a 150 to 200% increase from their steady state operations. They were one of the locations yesterday that lost power. And so they are doing an outstanding job in some trying circumstances. And lastly, I want to really call out attention to personnel throughout the city of Virginia Beach that is working outside of their comfort zone to support emergency management and the overall COVID operational structure. And specifically, as we work to assist moving employees around to support the operation, to Sean Coffey from Parks and Recreation, who reached out to my office and is now providing significant support to OEM as we work through this process. I thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. So, Mayor, members of council, and the rest of our audience, in the April 10th Friday packet, I submitted to you a revised proposed budget for the FY 2021 fiscal year. In that revised budget, I have proposed a number of expenditure reductions in order to balance the budget against a number of revenue reductions that we are anticipating could occur because of the COVID-19 emergency and the required social distancing and curtailing of a number of activities that are directly tied to our annual revenues. I would like to introduce David Bradley. He's the acting deputy city manager, and normally he is the director of the Office of Budget and Management Services. David?
Thank you, Mr. Leahy. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council, and our valued citizens. Just 3 short weeks ago, we presented the budget to you, and at that time, we felt really good about it. We put some caveats into it and said, we probably need to delay certain items and we'll look at them on a quarterly basis. At that time, we were only looking at a 15-day shutdown. By the end of that month, several days after that presentation, the federal government sent out a notice that we were going to close through April, and the state government said we'd close through June 10th. We knew at that point that we had to revise the budget and look at it a little differently because the revenue that we had in place would probably not be as we originally anticipated. So when we started looking at putting this revised budget together, we had certain guiding principles that we wanted to include. And I'm going to start with the second bullet first. You know, we don't know at this point, there's no playbook for this, there's no roadmap of what the revenue picture is going to be because of this COVID-19. So what we wanted to do was position the budget in a way that would be flexible to respond to either way. So if this is a short-term issue, then council could always come back and estimate realized revenue, and we could add some items back. But if it's a longer-term problem, then some of the measures that we're taking today will help us. For example, the position freeze is saving on, is going to allow us to have some personnel savings. We're looking at all expenditures contractual and trying to delay where possible. And we're proposing for this budget coming up now that we don't budget for attrition, or in other words, you use $5 million of vacancy savings to balance the budget. We think that will position us in case it is long-term that we lose out on some revenue. It's worse than what we're projecting here. Then those salary savings can be used to offset those revenue reductions. Think of it like this. Some people think that this will be a V response, kind of like a V curve. There was an immediate downfall in the economy and it will immediately come back. Some think it will be more like a U, that it went down and there will be a level of economic downturn for a longer period and come up. Different economists are looking at different things, and I'm going to talk about how we looked at it in a couple slides. I should point out, too, that the city manager also wanted to position the budget for hurricane season. You know, hurricanes come somewhat frequently here. One of the great things about living in Virginia Beach, you get to live in a beautiful area, but that beach also cost us occasional hurricanes. I was thinking what we had: Bonnie in 1998, Isabel 2003, Hurricane Matthew 2016, and they're calling for a busy hurricane season. So while we're absorbing the financial impact of COVID-19, City Manager also wanted to position the budget that we could also address something like that in the worst case scenario it happens. Hurricane Matthew, for example, cost just over $13 million to the city, and a lot of that was use of fund balance. One of the other guiding principles is we wanted to maintain services where we could. The citizen survey shows that our citizens value the vast majority of our services. So the city manager wanted to focus on those current services, and so that's where we went. We basically eliminated all new services or programs that were included in the budget. And we had some targeted reduction of existing positions, and we'll talk about that shortly. So another guiding principle, we did not include any tax increases as we talked about in the proposed budget, the original proposed budget 3 weeks ago. There's no real estate tax increase, no personal property. We do have the ERU rate related to stormwater that's already approved by City Council, and that's expected, that's a 6-year plan, and we're in the 2nd year of that. There's some minor changes in Parks and Rec fees that we do annually, and we are recommending a 2-cent reduction in the Sandbridge Service District rate. This budget, the revised budget, also takes into account council action to date, including the restaurant tax holiday that will impact 1 month of next fiscal year. So, we were talking earlier about the V curve and U curve. So kind of not knowing, not having that roadmap for how to deal with something like this. We've done a lot of research. We've read, we've talked to other localities, and we decided to do what Virginia Beach has generally done in the past. I'd call it be moderately conservative. We're making the assumption that this is going to take many months to pull out of, and we see a slow recovery through December. And as I said earlier, if it's faster than that, council could always come back and look at appropriating realized revenue. So as you can see here, this just gives you an idea of our consumer-driven revenues, and you can see over time what we think we would collect in any given month compared to what we normally would collect. So you can see sales 75% in July, hotel 50%, and that gradual increase as we get into December. This also protects us for the second wave. So maybe it doesn't come exactly like this, but there's some talk that this COVID-19, there could be a second wave. So we feel like whichever way this goes, we've tried to position the budget for that to occur. Now, I can tell you from looking at other localities and talking to some and reading newspapers, some of them think it's going to be more of a V-shape. And you'll see that their budgets are probably going to be what they were before, that they expect revenue to return as usual next fiscal year. I hope they're right. I think for our citizens and everybody, I hope they're right. But we want to prepare to go either way. So the other big thing is general fund balance, something that's used in the bond market as they look at how we perform. And when we were talking to our financial advisors, one of the things they said would be a good position for us to be is not go below that minimum. So we've redirected the CIP and looked at other things. When we presented the budget, we were at 10.3%. And remember, fund balance, think of it at home, would just be accumulated savings over time. So we want to be 8 to 12% of the following year's revenue. Generally, we're around 10.3%. With this revised budget, we think we'll be around 8.4, 8.5%, with a little bit of buffer if it gets worse, that we could still maintain council's position of 8%. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Hobbs, and he's going to walk you through some other changes.
Good afternoon. So now that David has provided you with some context around the city manager's revised budget, Kevin Chatelier and I are going to drill into some of the more specific budget recommendations. This slide shows the impact on revenue by source. The first column displays the budget as originally proposed. The middle column shows the revised amount for each revenue category, and the column on the far right shows the difference between the first two columns. As you can see, the revised revenue estimates show a decrease of $67.3 million when compared to the originally proposed budget. The area in peach at the bottom of the slide shows the amount in each column when compared to the 2020 budget. As you can see from this area, the revised revenue estimate is $2.3 million less than the 2020 budget. This slide shows the impact by fund and illustrates the net budget. As you can see from the column on the right, between the city and schools, the general fund is projected to decrease by $47.8 million. Of that amount, $27.4 million is being reduced from the city's general fund, while the remaining $20.4 million is being reduced from the transfer to schools based on the recently adopted revenue sharing formula. Also of note on this slide is the reduction of $12.4 million in estimated revenue from the TIP fund. While showing this loss of funding is based on our revised revenue estimates, we may ultimately recommend that some of this revenue be replaced by the use of fund balance in an effort to maintain current services. If City Council utilizes this strategy, the revised revenue estimate shown on this slide would need to be modified. So now that we have reviewed our revised revenue projections, let's look at appropriations. Due to the loss of $67.3 million in revenue, we are required to reduce appropriations by an equal amount in order to maintain a balanced budget. In order to do this, we are recommending the following strategies: targeted reductions in some previously approved programs, an emphasis on deferring or eliminating new programs that were introduced in the originally proposed city manager's budget in an effort to maintain our current levels of service, elimination of the 2.5% merit increase, as well as several other new and existing pay programs designed for recruitment and retention of city employees. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, relative to the TIP fund, we are reviewing the potential use of fund balance in certain funds. So let's first look at the impacts on the general fund. As I mentioned a few moments ago, excluding the transfer to schools, the general fund is projected to decrease by $27.4 million when compared to the budget as originally proposed. One of the existing items that we are recommending for delay is the construction of the new Burton Station Fire and EMS Station. While this recommendation does not impact the funding appropriated to this project, this delay will aid us in maintaining sufficient cash through these uncertain economic times. With the postponement and the construction of the station, there are 17 vacant positions between fire and EMS that we recommend delaying until FY22. We are also recommending the elimination of 10 long-term vacancies between the police department and emergency communications and citizen services, as well as 3 existing positions in the budget office, human resources, and the city manager's office. Further, we are also recommending a $1 million reduction in the vehicle replacement program in the general fund. The CIP also includes recommendations for reduction in year 1 appropriations to several projects. In the Economic and Tourism Development section, $1 million is being reduced from 17th Street Improvements 2, and $500,000 is being reduced from the Strategic Growth Area projects. In the Information Technology section, $1 million is being reduced from the City Software Upgrade and Replacement Plan. In the roadway section, we are recommending the reduction of $500,000 from the Rural Road Recurring Flooding Sea Level Rise and Resiliency Project. And in addition to these recommendations, or recommended reductions in year 1 appropriations, we are also recommending a 1-year delay in $6.2 million of funding for landfill number 2 phase 1 capping and $1.4 million in funding for the fire apparatus replacement project. We're also recommending the deferral of a number of new initiatives that were included in the city manager's proposed budget. First, we are recommending the deferral of all new positions and operating costs associated with the implementation of the Hilliard-Heinz report. This includes 19 new positions. We are also recommending the deferral of 1 new position in contractual services in the finance department that were needed to fully implement the recommendations from the 2018 disparity study. In the CIP, we are also reducing the transfer of pay-go for 2 capital projects related to the recommendation from the Hilliard Heinz report. I would note that the first project listed, CIP 3-166, Facilities Access Systems, will retain the $125,000 that was programmed for FY21 in the FY 2020 CIP. We are also recommending the elimination of the Southern Rivers Watershed Site Acquisition Project from the Parks and Recreation section of the CIP. In addition to the deferral of a number of new initiatives within the operating budget, the revised budget also recommends the elimination of a number of new positions that support city programs. The revised budget recommends the elimination of a new nurse position, additional renovations to the city's main training room in Building 19, funding for the replacement of AEDs throughout city facilities, and funding for the completion of a market salary survey within the Human Resources Department. It also recommends the elimination of a new library assistant supervisor position that was to be housed at the Oceanfront Library. 7 new stormwater positions funded through the general fund are also eliminated, or recommended for elimination. 5 of these positions were for a new BMP maintenance crew, and the remaining 2 positions were to address mandated MS4 water quality permitting requirements. Within the planning department, the revised budget recommends the elimination of 4 FTEs, which were to assist with the city's new short-term rental program, as well as 1 additional planning technician position that was for enhanced customer service within the department. Also recommended for elimination within the revised budget are 1.75 part-time positions in EMS. These positions were to expand lifeguard services at Sandbridge Beach in the months of May, September, and October. The elimination of funding to upgrade audiovisual equipment at the courthouse. The elimination of 3 new positions and enhanced marketing funding for the associated with the reopening of the Aquarium Marsh Pavilion. The elimination of 4 new positions in the Human Services Department, 2 of which were for a new mobile co-responder team, and the other 2 were new Child Protective Services caseworkers. A increase that was included in the originally proposed budget for the Parks and Recreation Department's urban forestry program, as well as increased funding for landscape maintenance services for several recently completed CIP projects, is also recommended for elimination. We're also recommending the elimination of a conversion of a contracted manpower position within the courts, as well as the establishment of 2 part-time positions within the sheriff's office. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin Chatelier, and he will continue to review some of the recommendations from the revised budget, as well as talk about some of the other funds included in the revised budget.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon. Continuing to look at the recommended reductions in the revised FY21 City Manager's operating budget. The Department of Information Technology in the original budget had been provided 2 FTEs for the implementation of the timekeeping and scheduling CIP project. The revised budget recommends the elimination of these 2 FTEs. Also within IT was the conversion of a mail clerk position from contracted manpower to an FTE. This is as well being recommended to be eliminated. Within the Department of Finance, a payroll specialist that was being provided in the original proposed budget is being recommended for elimination in the revised operating budget. The Department of Housing was provided 2 FTEs. 1 was an administrative analyst position to provide additional data collection and support, analytical support to measure the needs and outcomes of homeless services programs, as well as a conversion of a contracted manpower position for code enforcement purposes. Within the Department of Cultural Affairs, more specifically historic homes, within that department, a couple of positions were provided in the original proposed budget to enhance marketing efforts and planning efforts, as well as provide the newly established department with some administrative support. These 2 FTEs are recommended for elimination in the revised budget. Also recommended for elimination of the revised budget is increases provided to the Atlantic Wildfowl and Life Saving Museum. It's recommended that those funding increases be returned to their FY20 funding levels. within the Department of Public Works. Additional funding was provided to cover the general fund's portion of replacement of the grinder at the landfill. This grinder is utilized to create mulch, which is used across the entire city. It was deemed to be a hazard by Public Works and in need of replacement. Public Works has requested the replacement of this still occur in FY21. However, they're recommending the use of the Waste Management Fund to replace this need, thereby allowing for this elimination of costs in the general fund to be recommended in the revised budget. Also being eliminated or recommended for elimination in the revised budget is some contractual services that were provided to Public Works for the purposes of data gathering and facility condition assessment to go along with the newly implemented asset management software. Continuing new operating budgets, initiatives proposed or recommended for elimination in the FY21 operating budget. Part-time positions that were provided to provide support in the Commissioner of Revenue's office, as well as a real estate assessor office appraiser. That was a full-time FTE. Those are recommended for elimination, as well as making reductions in regional contributions. In the original proposed budget, majority of the contributions remain flat with their FY20 level in looking at contributions to these regional organizations. However, additional funding was provided to several of the organizations. Some of these increased contributions were the result of regional agreements, and in the revised budget, those increased contributions have been unchanged. However, there were several new initiatives that also were underway in the original proposed budget. The revised budget recommends the elimination of these new initiatives in FY21, including increased contributions to the Virginia Arts Festival, Stop Inc., Hampton Roads Pride, Eggleston, and the African American Cultural Center. Additional information about contribution to regional organizations is provided on page 218 of the operating budget. Within the revised operating budget, it's also recommended that all compensation increases and compensation-related programs be eliminated. Starting at the top of this slide with the Public Safety Workforce Development Program, year 2 of that, the recommended elimination of this will halt future compensation increases for participants that complete training and become eligible at a future point in time. Also recommended is the elimination of the supervisor midpoint adjustment, salary adjustments, as well as salary supplements provided to state court clerks within the Juvenile Domestic Relations Court, as well as General District Court position or department or court system. These supplements are provided to these state employees, and they're actually 100% state employees and not the city employees, and therefore it's being recommended for elimination. Also recommended for elimination is the sheriff pay parity year 2, as well as the newly recommended, or in the original budget, recommended engineer recruitment and retention program. The revised budget also recommends the elimination of the proposed 2.5% compensation increase for all city employees and part-time positions. In total, this compensation increase was $10 million need, half of which was being funded or provided through the use of budgeting for attrition or vacancy savings. With the elimination of this compensation increase, it also eliminates the need to budget for attrition in the FY21 revised budget. Some other known revenue changes that we're continuing to track and monitor is that it appears that within the state budget, $10 million that was originally being provided for 2 roadway projects, West Neck Road and Nemo Parkway Phase 2A, has been eliminated from the state budget. In the original proposed budget, the additional state funding allowed towards those projects freed up local revenue and allowed us to redirect that towards other priorities and needs in the operating budget. A big hole and a big need in the original proposed budget was the funding of building renovations 1, 2, and 11. With the loss of the state revenue, There will be a need to there'll be a need to modify the means of financing within the CIP to redirect the local funds to initially the West Neck Road project and the Nemo Parkway Phase 2A project to make them whole, and the need to swap out and add an additional $10 million of public facility revenue bonds to make the building renovations for buildings 1, 2, and 11 whole within the CIP. This will not have an immediate impact in terms of on the operating budget. However, at a future point in time when the debt service occurs, it will. Something else we're continuing to track and monitor is the loss of revenue associated with the state recordation tax revenues. The state budget has established a dedicated funding source for a regional transit authority. The recordation tax revenue was historically remitted to localities. However, the state has decided to use this as the dedicated funding source for this newly established regional transit authority for Virginia Beach. This results in a loss of about $1.9 million in revenue. Within the revised budget, it was recommended that this loss in revenue was offset through a reduction and a reduced contribution to HRT. However, as is ever changing with the state budget at this point in time of year, we're now learning that this might not be a viable option, as one of the governor's recommended budget amendments prevents localities from reducing their contributions to HRT to offset the loss of this revenue stream. So we'll need to continue to track and monitor this and look for another way to close that within the operating budget. In terms of FTEs, in total, the revised operating budget, when compared to the original proposed, recommends a reduction of 92.83 FTEs. Within the general fund, this is a reduction of 30 existing vacancies and current FTEs, as well as the elimination of 55.83 new positions that were proposed in the original proposed budget. It's also recommended that 7 positions that were new within the TIP fund in the original proposed budget be eliminated as well. Again, in total, this reduction 92.83 is when comparing the original proposed with what the revised operating budget, recommended revised budget is. Earlier, Jonathan had noted as a result of the loss of revenue, several funds other than the general fund were being negatively impacted. On this slide here, you can see at the top, one of the largest impacts was to the TIP fund with a loss of nearly $12.4 million. In an effort to balance this fund, it will take several initiatives or several balancing requirements, including the reduction of new initiatives that were included in the original proposed, the elimination of reserves, reserved for future CIP commitments, as well as the potential use of fund balance in order to maintain current operations. Another fund impacted as a result of the lost revenue is the TAP fund with a revenue reduction of $3.6 million. A potential balancing strategy for this fund would be to reduce marketing and advertising contracts in FY21, or it's also possible, based on availability of TIP fund balance, to potentially use some of the TIP fund fund balance to make this fund whole. Another fund, excuse me, that was impacted by the lost revenue was the Sandbridge SSD. Nearly $2 million was the impact to this fund. As a balancing strategy, it's recommended to reduce pay-go transfer to the CIP and have a corresponding reduction within CIP project 8026, Sandbridge Beach Restoration. The open space fund was also negatively impacted as a result of lost meals tax revenue. The loss to the open space fund was about $1.3 million. The recommended strategy to balancing this fund would be to reduce the pay-go transfer from that fund to the CIP, as well as a corresponding reduction in CIP project 4-306. The ARP and the Parks and Rec Special Revenue Fund both also had reductions in revenue. However, to balance those, it's recommended to reduce the budgeted reserve that was originally in place within the proposed operating budget. Something that we continue to look at and monitor and track is going to be the impact on schools. As Jonathan noted earlier in the presentation, the revised budget has schools revenue projections, resulting in a loss of schools about $20.4 million when compared to the original city manager's proposed operating budget. We're continuing to work with schools to better understand this impact and what the loss of this revenue will mean, as well as their plan to mitigate these losses. It's recommended and would be ideal for the school board to provide a reconciled budget at the April 28th City Council meeting, so that way City Council could have an opportunity to take that into consideration for their deliberation at the City Council reconciliation on May 5th. There's been discussion of the need to get back to baseline 20 or even potentially make reductions below that level. This slide provides a little bit deeper dive into the changes in both city funds as well as school funds. Overall, you can see here within the red box that city funds are being reduced by a net of $20.8 million when comparing the revised budget to the FY20 budget. This net reduction actually includes an increase of $4.2 million within the city enterprise funds. Acting DCM David Bradley had mentioned this earlier. The biggest driver of that increase of the $4.2 million is the result of a 3.5-cent ERU rate increase that is included in the 21 operating budget that was previously approved by City Council. In looking at schools, in the total change for schools when comparing the revised budget to the FY20 budget is an increase of $18.5 million. So even though schools' budget has been reduced by $20.4 million in lost local revenue via the school funding formula, this increase is largely being driven by the fact of a result of increase in state funding within their initial proposed budget. And as I noted earlier, we're continuing to work with schools to determine the impacts of this pandemic on their operating budget. I suspect that the revised budget will not result in an $18.5 million increase when comparing to the 20 budget, and I would not be surprised if it didn't in fact have some level of reductions in state revenue funding. In total, between city and schools, the revised operating budget is decreasing by $2.3 million when compared to the the FY20 operating budget. Again, we're also in the process of continuing to do some refinement and tweaking and working through some of these special revenue funds. So, for example, if it's decided to utilize tip fund balance to keep services current within that fund, that'll result in a change to this bottom line. As well as we continue to work with departments and monitor the department's specific revenue sources. And it's potential, there's a good potential that we'll be bringing further reductions and operating budget cuts for City Council's consideration in the FY21 operating budget. The process moving forward, there's a need to further discuss as well as make small refinements and tweaks on various funds. More specifically, emphasis and additional analysis needs to be provided on the TIP fund, TAP, open space, Sandbridge SSD, and again, the school's operating budget. Moving forward continued. We're continuing to explore options discussed by City Council, such as appropriating the operating budget 1 quarter of the year at a time. As we continue to look into this concept, there appear to be several challenges that we would need to work through, some of which include contracts. So contracts for both city and schools, more specifically the schools, who sign teachers to an annual contract at the start of the year. So again, these are things we need to continue to work at and evaluate. Also a challenge would be the need to appropriate only a portion of the CIP 1 quarter at a time. A possible thing to overcome through this approach would be that this could result in delay of some CIP projects, as the city requires all the funding to be in place and appropriated prior to the awarding of a contract. Further, also complicating some of these matters is that the Department of Finance and Budget are currently implementing a new financial system, which is anticipated to go live on July 1. Staff time up until that point in time will be leveraged to get this project up and going and active. approving the operating budget one quarter at a time while implementing this new system would again be an additional challenge that we would need to overcome. We plan on continuing to adapt and have ongoing interactions with City Council through whatever legal means is possible. Virtual public hearings on April 22nd and April 28th. So the initial public hearing ads that went out and were advertised in the Beacon had advertised the location to be in the convention center. As a result of the extended stay-at-home order, the public hearing has now been changed to a virtual public hearing. Additional information about these meetings and how to participate is available on the City of Virginia Beach's website at vbgov.com. And again, we're also hopeful that the school board will be able to provide a reconciled operating budget for City Council to consider prior to City Council's reconciliation workshop on May 5th. And that concludes the presentation of the revised city manager's operating budget. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Leahy for closing comments.
Well, again, Mayor and members of council and our viewing audience, there are a few parts of the city and few parts of the city organization that are not impacted by these proposed cuts. I'd like to just emphasize again, we have tried to position this revised budget such that if the economy does turn around quickly, council would be in a place to restore some of these cuts. But on the other hand, we have to be cognizant of the fact that the economy may not turn around. Some of our revenue reductions might be a little optimistic, and we might be suffering from a very bad and very rough hurricane season that hits us at the exact same time. So we've positioned the budget to be able to handle that too. We would be at that point having obviously to look at attrition and vacancy savings, and probably some severe significant cuts in the CIP projects. I do want to point out that many of our CIP projects are actual construction projects throughout the city. These projects are executed by private construction companies, and they are putting people to work and employing people and keeping the economy moving. So while we might cut CIP severely and reduce the city expenditure side, we would also be impacting the economy throughout the city. In the coming weeks, David Bradley and I are available to meet with you either at a table with a lot of distance between us or virtually to meet with you individually. And all you need to do is email me or call me, and we can set up a time. Also, as we have done in the past, we will be turning around the questions that you might submit to us, and we'll try to turn them around as quickly as we can and get them in the Friday packet for you each week. So just if you have questions, if you want to look at different scenarios, please just ask us. And finally, I would say that for all of you out there, for you and yours, please be safe and please stay safe. And thank you very much for your time this afternoon.